Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 2000, and I can now reveal I have seen 20 films from this particular year, and I'm quite pleased about that. It's a nice round number, and I think the quality today is a lot higher than what we had for the 99 rankings, but make your own mind up as we're going through. A quick reminder as always that the top 2 films today will be going through to the eventual grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. But for now, let's concentrate on the year 2000, and we'll start with the film that I consider to be by far the worst film that came out in this particular year. So here's an interesting paradox, because I had the original Blair Witch Project winning my 1999 rankings, but for this 2000 rankings, I've got the sequel, Rock Bottom. I'll give them a little bit of credit for trying to do something different with this film, but at this point, really? I mean, at least wait until Blair Witch 5 when the formula has really gotten tired, you know, but after the first one, all I wanted was more camcorders in the woods, same sort of thing, you know, but maybe just mix it up a little bit, but not to this extent. I mean, making a meta film which doesn't take place in the same universe as the first one, and yeah, this was pretty bad. I mean, I can cope with some of the stuff that you see in the first half. There's a nice sort of snowy setting, and this idea of characters waking up and the stuff that they're seeing on their camcorders from the night before they totally don't remember. Some gestations of interesting ideas there, but the minute that the characters get to the warehouse type place for the second half of the film, it's all downhill from that point onwards. I had a lucky escape with this one because I was coming back from somewhere with a friend of mine. We were on some kind of long journey back from a night out or something, and I tried to persuade him to go to the cinema with me on Sunday night to watch this film when it came out. He said no, and I didn't end up going on my own, and I consider that to be a very, very lucky escape. I will never watch this film again. I think I watched this one when I was back home from uni one time with my dad. It was a strange sort of film for us both to watch because totally not our sort of thing. I presume it was just on TV and we thought, sod it, let's watch this. So I guess it's a story about a young boy who wants to be a ballerina or something, but his dad is totally against the idea, and there are various other barriers to him achieving this dream as well. I think it has a happy ending. It's an inoffensive film, it's fine, you know, it does what it sets out to do. It's not my thing, which is why it's this low in the ranking today, but there's nothing about it that I can really criticise. There's only really Blair Witch 2 in this ranking today that I have a big beef with. Everything else actually has at least some kind of merit, and we're at that point now going forwards. This is a comedy film about a bunch of characters who go on a road trip across America because they want to get to this particular girl's apartment and intercept her mail before she receives a videotape that shows her boyfriend cheating on her. Not a bad plot for this sort of movie. Again, like with the previous film, Billy Elliot, totally not my thing. I randomly watched it once, way back in the day. From what I can recall, I found it mildly amusing, enough that I watched it all the way to the end, but I certainly wouldn't watch it again. I can imagine that this film was rushed into production on the strength of, or the success, I should say, of American Pie the previous year. There were lots of these kind of teenage screwball comedies that came out on the back of American Pie. I found out the other day from looking on Wiki that they actually made a road trip sequel at some point. Totally never watching that. But yeah, nothing more to say about this. Not my film, but I have seen it. This is about a girl who moves to a big city hoping to become a big singer, but in the meantime she's got to take up a job working as a barmaid, where she ends up singing anyway, funnily enough. All the time she's sending off demo tapes to record labels hoping to get noticed, and she's also got this romance going on with some guy that she's just met. Again, totally not my film. It's amazing looking back just how many weird films I used to watch when I was younger that are absolutely not my normal cup of tea. But there's nothing wrong with this film, it's just not my thing. You know, I'm not going to criticise it just for the sake of it, but it is more of a woman's film, I'd say. Most of the characters are female, apart from the main love interest. It's the sort of film that women in their late teens, early 20s will watch when they're single. They'll sit there with a glass of wine in one hand, Ben and Jerry's on the right. Not really a guys sort of film. Somehow I watched it once, and it was all right, I'll be fair. I gave this series a spin a few years ago. I think I watched all the way up to the 7th or the 8th one. I didn't feel like going any further than that. Some of these films feel a little bit cookie cutter these days, I guess. I don't think Marvel coming along was a great thing for the X-Men films. I mean, these are nobody's favourite superhero films, are they? But they're still entertaining. If you go back to them, they're still very good to watch. There's lots of colourful characters, lots of colourful villains. Magneto, the girl with the blue skin was always my favourite character. Not that I can remember what she's called. No, it's not going to come to me. Hugh Jackman, obviously very good as Wolverine. The Rogue character was very good. I could go on. And at some point, I think they will try and put the X-Men into the Marvel Universe. That would be really cool. In terms of this first X-Men movie, though, I've still not let my 10-year-old boy try this because there's a really gruesome scene where this guy just melts. He just turns into jelly and just fades away, and it's a little bit gruesome. Apart from that scene, I probably would have let my boy watch these early X-Men films already, but I don't know, he's going to high school this year, so maybe I'll change my position on X-Men, I think. This is a film about two teenage lads who go to Ibiza to try and get laid for the first time. The characters were taken from the Harry Enfield TV show, which I had seen a few times before this film came out, so I was interested to see this to the point where I actively sought it out. It wasn't a film that I just happened to watch on TV one night because I was bored, like Coyote Ugly or Road Trip, that kind of thing. So many quotable lines in this film. All I want to do is do it. And Eyeball Paul, what a great character. Lads, you mix on White Label. At the end, when nobody in the club's dancing to his tunes anymore, he's like, dance, you scumbags. I could go on. This film, genuinely very, very funny. You know a film is funny when I find it funny. I'm not sure if you'd call this one a horror or a thriller. It's sort of about this woman who realises that there's a killer in very close proximity to where she lives. I'm being deliberately vague there because this is one of those films where it's hard to talk about it without giving away the big twist near the end, so I'm not going to risk doing that in case you haven't seen it. Harrison Ford's in it, bizarrely. He was going through a phase in his career where he'd sort of got too old to be the big action star, so he was trying a few different things. And was this as close as he ever got to being in a horror film? I don't know. I haven't looked at his filmography in a while. Being honest, I don't think he was a great fit for this film, from what I can remember. But the film itself is all right. I watched it with a group of housemates in a student house in 2002. How's that for narrowing it down in terms of memory? And I wouldn't mind seeing it again, actually. It's been 20 years now. It was all right, this film. This is the film I probably remember the least well out of all of those that I've included today. In fact, I had to go on Wikipedia just to remind myself of the plot, and then certain things triggered memories in my mind. Incidentally, there's another film called High Fidelity starring John Cusack, which I didn't include today because same sort of story. I was sure that I'd seen it, and I'm still sure I've seen it, but when I went on Wiki to sort of remind myself of the plot, nothing was familiar to me when I looked at the story. So for that reason, I decided to leave that film off. But in the case of Cherry Falls, just enough memories were triggered for me to be able to give it a ranking today. When I was looking up the plot online, you know how when you're surfing, one thing leads to another? Well, I ended up drifting over to some reviews of Cherry Falls, and they're actually very positive for this film. In fact, this gets described as one of the best slashers from the early 2000s. So I'm going to have to check this one out again. I don't remember it being anything more than sort of all right when I watched it, but who knows, maybe I'll have a different opinion 20 years on. So this was Guy Ritchie's follow-up to Lock, Stock. It's not quite as good as that film, but it's still a must-see if you enjoyed Lock, Stock. It's not as quotable as Lock, Stock, though. I mean, if you want to talk to me about Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, I can fire off quotes left, right and centre, but my most recent rewatch of Snatch was only about 6 months ago, and I'm struggling for even one quote to give you from it. But it's still a very funny black comedy set in a gangster world. It's got a great cast as well. Jason Statham, Brad Pitt, Benicio del Toro in a very funny role, Vinnie Jones again. It's a film that can absolutely put a smile on my face, even though I certainly wouldn't put it anywhere near qualifying for the grand final. I've reviewed all the Final Destination films. I've even got a playlist just for that franchise. I've done a rankings video as well. I'm very happy that they're going to be making a number 6. If you haven't heard, I think it's going to be releasing either this year or next year on the Paramount streaming platform in the United States. I've no idea. I am sort of wondering if we're going to be able to get the film, therefore, in the UK. This could be another situation a bit like with Paranormal Activity 7, which I've still not seen. Even though it came out way back in October, it's a little bit frustrating when they release films on streaming platforms that are a bit hard to get in the UK. So I guess we'll see what happens with that. In terms of this first Final Destination film, it's not one of my favourites. It's probably the best in terms of storyline. It was originally an X-Files episode, and then they retooled it into a feature-length film and took Mulder and Scully out of it, obviously. But the kills in it are not as fun as what you get in the later movies, and the characters are a little bit drab as well, especially the main two. I really enjoyed this film when I first watched it, but every time I've rewatched it over the years, I kind of lose interest a little bit once we get past the plane section. I didn't like this one when I first saw it. I was expecting it to be more like the first one, lots of spycraft, stealth, mystery and suspense. But this film's got almost none of that. I mean, it's just a generic action thriller, really, which lays all of its cards out on the table from a very early stage. It doesn't even have lots of the madcap stunts that a lot of the later films would have. In fact, if you're going to be cynical about it, you could actually say that once you've seen Tom Cruise clinging onto the side of that rock face at the beginning with no ropes, seemingly, then you've seen the best that the film has to offer. But I watched it again about 10 years after my first viewing, and I liked it a lot more. I am a certified Mission Impossible fan. This is a very stylish film, a very glossy film. John Woo does have a lot of panache. I just don't think he was completely cut out for this sort of movie. It's like sort of putting a square peg into a round hole by hiring Woo. But if you go into this film having seen it before, I think it's a lot easier to enjoy. Thandie Newton's very good in it. I like Anthony Hopkins' role. I think they should have invited him back. They probably did, and he was just too busy to come back for number 3, but that was a shame. I think it would have been cool if he'd have done a lot of these. But I totally get it if you don't like Mission Impossible 2. It's probably one of the weaker ones, but I've sort of made my peace with it over the years, and I can enjoy it now. But the villains in it are absolutely garbage. That's the worst thing about it. This is another one similar to Mission Impossible 2. Totally didn't like it the first time I watched it. Much different experience further down the line. It was actually at the cinema that I saw it first time around, and I was disgusted with what I watched that day. I mean, when I walked out of that place, I was done with Scream as far as I was concerned. Possibly there was a bit of fatigue in play. Third Scream film in 5 years, but more than that, I think I just wanted a darker film at the time. Years later, when I watched it again, I think I was much more content to have this lighter tone that they went for, and there's so much else to like in there. I mean, the Hollywood setting I absolutely love. I like the fact that this one connects back to the first film. You don't get that with Scream 2, it's just its own story. And I think this, out of all of the sequels, does the most for Sydney's character. It gives her the most to do, I think. So I don't know why this one is so universally placed at the bottom of the pile when it comes to Scream films. I am one of its biggest defenders now, having started out as one of its biggest haters. I wonder, are there lots of people out there who are sort of like me in that they really didn't like it the first time around, but they've just never give it another chance, so now they just sort of permanently hate it and are constantly writing bad things about it on the internet? Who the hell knows? This is a film about a guy who's backpacking around the world, and he ends up in Thailand, and he meets this couple who tell him about this secret island nearby. So he goes there with them, and it turns out there's like an international community of people living in this really exotic place. So this guy decides to move in with them. He just packs up his life. He meets this really gorgeous girl to be with as well. The first half of the film is like some really out there fantasy, and when you're watching it, you just want to be this guy that Leonardo DiCaprio is playing. Not because he gets the girl necessarily, but just because he's living this really ballsy existence where every time he wakes up, he doesn't know which country he's going to end up in, or whether he's going to be drinking snake's piss one night or doing something else that's interesting the next night. Second half of the film, things start to go wrong. All these people who live on the island, they've all got various sort of psychological problems, especially DiCaprio's character. And it's interesting where this film goes, because you totally can't predict what's going to happen in the last sort of 20, 30 minutes. But it's quite bittersweet, I think, when it gets to the eventual ending. It's a very thought-provoking film. I don't think it was well received when it first came out, but I don't think critics really got it, because I've always found it a really cool film. It was done by Danny Boyle, who did 28 Weeks Later and Sunshine, very good director, does a lot of interesting stuff. So if you've never seen The Beach, I'd absolutely recommend you give it a try. I think this was a good choice on Leonardo DiCaprio's part, doing this so soon after Titanic. I think he got a bit of criticism as well for doing this film, but I think this was a good choice on his part. This is a sci-fi horror film about a character called Riddick, who's played by Vin Diesel. He's a criminal who's in custody with these characters who all end up crash landing on this planet, and they've all got to band together to survive these hostile aliens who only come out at night. It sounds very derivative, but when you watch the film, you realise that it's absolutely got its own very unique style. If you like films like Aliens, you've got to watch this, or if you like any kind of sci-fi horror film, you've got to give it a try. There would be other films involving this character, Riddick, later down the line, but this is still absolutely the best of the three that they've released up to this point, I think. So yeah, give it a shot. Riddick is much more of a badass than Dominic Toretto, I'll say that. This is another one I had to sort of strain the memory banks on, similar to Cherry Falls. I'm long overdue watching this film, and if you've watched the channel a while, you'll know that I'm really into my shark films, piranha films, or stuff to do with alligators, and this is one of the best. Tobe Hooper is the director, absolutely one of his 5 best films, I'd say. Not that I've seen all of them. I couldn't tell you too much about the plot on this because my memories are getting sort of vague now, but I just remember that it's really cool. It keeps you gripped all the way through, and it's got quite a funny, clever sort of an ending, so absolutely recommended. All the films from this point onwards are recommended. I mean, we're up to number 6 now. If you're not familiar with Battle Royale, it's about a group of about 50 teenage kids in this class in Japan. They're all taken to this island on the pretense of it being some kind of school trip, but then they're drugged, and when they're knocked out, they all have explosive collars put on their necks. If you've seen The Running Man, you know what the deal is. And when they wake up, they're all told that they have to fight to the death until there's just one of them left, and then the winner will be allowed to go home. It's not like a big free-for-all fight in the same little space. They're all scattered to the winds on this island, and they're given 3 days to sort themselves out until there's one remaining. Weapons have been placed all over this island. It's a completely bonkers idea. I think the reason why this is all happening is because the Japanese government have decreed that this will happen once a year, just to teach kids a lesson, you know, teach them about behaviour and respect towards adults. It's absolute bunkum, but it's bloody good fun, and it's quite a well-made film. It is in bad taste, admittedly, but it's fascinating watching how the different kids react to this situation. Some of them love it. They just go out there and start carving up their classmates without a second thought. There are others who just refuse to believe that it's actually real. They just carry on hanging out with their classmates as if they're on a school trip, even though they've got these collars around their necks. Some of the kids commit suicide. There's this one girl who just starts seducing lads and then killing them. It's a very interesting film. It used to be one of my favourite films back in my 20s, but when I was a little bit more rebellious in my tastes, if you like. As I've got older, I'm less inclined to be massively into a film like this, which is basically just one big violence orgy for no real purpose. You know, I mean, even a film like Halloween has got more purpose than Battle Royale, because there have been people like Michael Myers who have gone around killing people senselessly, but there has never been anything in real life that has been like Battle Royale. It's pure fantasy. It won't be for everybody, but if you can get past the fact that it's in bad taste, it's a really, really good film. This is a film about the war on drugs, specifically in relation to the USA and Mexico, but it's a bunch of smaller stories which are sort of loosely interconnected, but a lot of the main characters in this film don't actually end up meeting each other during the entire 2.5-hour runtime. So it's sort of similar in a way to Magnolia, which I was talking about in my previous rankings video. This film is shot in a very interesting way. Steven Soderbergh, he's put weird filters on the different stories, so you always know which one's which. So like one of the stories has this weird blue sort of look to it. Another one has this grainy yellow. There's lots of good actors in this. Michael Douglas, Benicio del Toro, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Don Cheadle. It's a very realistic film. It's very grounded. It doesn't feature anything which is too over the top, too Hollywoodized. And I've always liked this one. I saw it on a rental with my dad very early on in its lifespan, and later on, when DVDs were a thing, this was one of the first DVDs I ever bought. In fact, it was my third DVD. Night of the Living Dead was my first, Demons was my second, and Traffic was my third. So this film actually holds the accolade of being the first non-horror film that I ever bought, but it's a really good one. It's not necessarily the most famous of films, but it's really, really excellent. So check it out if you've not seen it. So today's unlucky film, which only just misses out on the grand final, is The Patriot. This one does feel very comparable to Braveheart, you know, that other historical war film that Gibson did around about this time. This does sort of feel like Braveheart with a different skin, almost. And at the time that I first saw Braveheart and The Patriot, I would have said that Braveheart was the better of the two. But over time, I think I've just drifted more towards this one. Mainly because, and I'm going into spoilers here, but you know what, these are pretty old films. I'm not going to feel too guilty about giving away their secrets. This one actually has quite a happy ending for the most part, whereas the last 20, 30 minutes of Braveheart are just flipping depressing, which is why I've probably not gone back to it now in nigh on 15, 20 years. But The Patriot is really, really good. It's just a very, very enjoyable film about the American Civil War. Gibson's very good in it. Jason Isaacs is pretty good as the main villain. And again, same with Traffic. If you've never seen it, absolutely give this one a watch. But it's now time to find out which films are going through to the final. I've got two more films to come in this ranking. Let's now find out which is the film which finishes runner-up today. Yay! Memento is into the final. This is one of the cleverest films I've ever seen. The whole thing is played backwards. So the first scene we see in the film is the last scene in the story. And then we see the second to last scene in the story. And then the third last scene and so on. It's not entirely like that. There are various interludes here and there, which, you know what, it's hard to talk about this film in just 1 minute or 2 minutes. It has to be seen to be believed. I would say that this is absolutely a 5 out of 5 masterpiece movie, directed by Christopher Nolan, still one of his best films, I would say, although it was one of his early ones. Guy Pearce plays the lead role. He's a guy suffering from amnesia. Joe Pantoliano's in it as well. That girl from The Matrix, can't remember her name. The movie feels very white in terms of its look. Could just be Guy Pearce's clothes, maybe, I don't know. But this is brilliant. I don't just recommend this film. If you haven't seen it, I implore you to get off your arse and go watch it. But do so on a midweek night. Don't drink while you're watching it. It is quite a complicated thing to sort of get your head around. It's not a Friday night movie, if you see what I mean. Watch Scarface or something on a Friday night. Memento's more your midweek sort of fare, but you must absolutely watch this film at least once. It's brilliant. But it hasn't won today's ranking, so let's now find out which film has. Father to a murdered child, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. Oh, words that just cut me deep. I mean, this film is amazing. I saw it quite close to when I saw Scream 3, actually. And I didn't know much about it going in. I'd not seen a trailer. I wasn't that excited to see it. I just randomly caught it with my girlfriend one Saturday afternoon. But by the time I came out, I was in bits. I mean, I was struggling to control my emotions. It was the same when I came out of Titanic. It was that kind of level of emotional intensity as I walked out of the cinema. Just an incredible film. It grabs you by the balls from the first 10 minutes and doesn't let go for 2.5 hours. This is one of the most amazing historical action, sword and sandals epics that's ever been made. Take a bow, Ridley Scott, Russell Crowe, what a performance by him. And the guy who plays the baddie, Joaquin Phoenix, he's an intolerable twat throughout this film, but my God, what an acting performance he puts in. Absolutely incredible. This film is awesome, and it's going through to the grand final. And I guess that brings us to the end of today's ranking. There is one more question left to ask. So I've got 4 films on my little list today. One of them is the Shaft remake. I quite liked the original trilogy, so yeah, I'd like to see Samuel L. Jackson's take. The Sixth Day, just because it's an Arnold Schwarzenegger film, so why not? Vertical Limit, I think some kind of action thriller set high up in the snowy mountains. Sounds sort of good. And finally, Ginger Snaps, a quite well-known werewolf movie, so sign me up for that as well. So those 4 films, at some point I'd like to check them out. But that's it for today's video. Thank you for joining me. I will be back very soon to do a ranking of 2001. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.